life. I'm gonna be honest, because I spent many mornings fixing Adobe, fixing my email, licking a stamp, doing this, doing something at the bottom of the functions worksheet, and then wondering why I'm not making any progress, right? Why? Because you think you're worth $500 an hour. You just spent the morning doing like minimum wage work. That's why, So and you don't think about it that way until it's presented to you, like until you presented it to me, like Daniel, like that. I never really thought about it that way. I thought this is just life. Some people are better at it than me, right? And that's why I'm where I'm at, right? And it's not. It's kind of scientific, actually. What's the most valuable? Do that. Get someone else to do the other stuff. It's that easy.
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hey, Steve Riley, welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. And today I have not one, but two special guests. I have Daniel Struna, one of our terrific practice advisors, and Matthew Kaufman. So Matt, welcome to the podcast. Dan, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you guys here.
Thanks, Steve. I'm very excited to be on the podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Likewise. Good to be back.
It's always great to have you here, Dan. And Matt, you said something absolutely hysterical. But before you share everybody the insight and the joke, tell everybody where you practice and what you do, just briefly, so people know who you are and what you're about from a practicing perspective.
All righty. My name is Matthew Kaufman. I practice employment law with a focus on representing employees. And what I like to, in Thousand Oaks, California, what I like to say is I help people get their lives back together again, because that's basically what I do for my good clients or for people that I really like to represent. So it's basically wrongful termination and compensation claims.
All in California. Do you do federal?
Actually, no. I've actually practiced in a variety of states. It's mainly in California, right? But I've had cases in Massachusetts. I've had cases in Arkansas. I've had cases in Colorado. So I have brief bag, will travel kind of attitude.
Got it. So for a good case, you're not afraid of an airplane?
Nope.
And so do you also do defense or just plaintiffs only?
I do zero defense for the most part.
All plaintiffs. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. So this is terrific. And as we go through this, I may ask you some more questions about how your practice works. But the reason that you're on the podcast is actually you kind of proposed to be on the podcast. And you have this great premise. So your great premise is how Atticus has worked for you after your first 12 months with Atticus, and basically how it could work for someone else. And so why did you want to get on the podcast? Why did you want to, join Dan and I to talk about this?
Well, like I was saying before, I think it's a great organization, not to be like too much of an advertisement, right? But I've had a really good, positive experience. In law, which is kind of like warfare, this is a building up experience, which is such a refreshing thing. As opposed to the confrontational, day-to-day that you usually get. And I've gotten some really good results too. I have to toot my own horn. It worked. And I love listening to the podcast. I guess I'm a masochist, right? And I was thinking all these people are like aspirational is what I would call them. And they're very far along in their, I guess, better business, right? Like I never doubted myself as a lawyer, but I certainly doubt myself as a business person, right? So they're like, you have people with, a 10-digit attorney, right? I think it was 10 digits or 8 digits, whatever, many digits. And I was like, well, that's great. And I would love to be that guy, but it seems like a long way away. Right. And it's not like what I would like for someone like me, I mean, and someone like me is someone like at the time, 6 months in and wondering, what am I doing? Is this going to work? Am I on the road to ruin? Right. Which is I always wonder anyways. Right. That's like a constant, soundtrack in my head, I think. And so I thought, hey, I should talk about why this worked for the regular folks. Right. And so I told that to Daniel, who's on the podcast today, and here I am.
Perfect. So what was the challenge that you faced when you joined Atticus? Because you're really you come to the summit, which is our annual program, our annual event, but you predominantly work with Daniel as your coach. But what's the challenge that you faced that made you join? Like, can you describe your practice when you joined, and when did you join? What was happening in your life?
All right. Well, just a little background. I had the misfortune of being very financially successful in my practice starting out. And as a result, I learned none of the basics. And I thought it was going to last forever. Right. And over time, you lose 1%, 5% a year. And I had a million bad habits and bad practices. And then COVID hit. And that was really bad for me, COVID. Like the court stopped, everything stopped. And I sort of fell victim to this mentality too. I mean, I think this is something I really have to mention is I got a lot of bad ideas in the sense that like a lot of like prohibitions started to rise in my mind. Like you have to save money because it's COVID. You're not earning money right now. And so you have to give up your staff, which was actually a good thing in a way, because I didn't know how to train good or keep good staff. But, these thoughts, these prohibitions in your mind, and I call them all-purpose excuses, by the way, because they fit. If you listen to the AI seminars, you'll hear the same excuses, right? It's too expensive. It's not going to work. It's this and that, right? It kind of boxes you in like a Dennis Rodman, like defensive basketball player. And soon you're just totally boxed out, right? And eventually I'm like at home, practicing at home, which I found very depressing. I didn't know what to do. I overcame my first prohibition, and that was things are going to get better if I apply myself, right? Notwithstanding what I thought at the time was the super high cost. That's still a super high cost, but the high cost of getting private coaching, was a prohibition. You're not going to make any money, right? You're not. This is too much. I was like, well, there's probably, like you could probably respond to myself like, hey, it's probably free on the internet. Why don't you go find it, right? But you're not, right? So in that sort of wandering answer, that's how I ended up at Atticus. Was kind of I boxed myself out mentally, and I needed some help, and I was willing to accept it.
Well, that's a big thing right there, is that a lot of lawyers don't recognize they might need some help on the business side, not on the legal side, but on the business side. And very few are willing to accept it. And then very few are willing to invest in it. So it puts you in a very rarefied space in life. Like the prohibitions you mentioned, you push them to the side, say, no, actually, I really want to have a better practice. I need to find some help. I'm willing to take a risk on that help, and I'm willing to invest in that help. So did somebody refer you in? How did you get involved with Atticus? How did you get involved in the community?
I have to say it was my first really great research project for finding like a service. I'm a very impulsive person. It's on my DISC assessment actually. And usually I'll just take the first one that comes. And I actually, though, this time I was like, I'm going to really find the best ones. No. And so I researched a lot, actually, a lot of internet time, a lot of asking around. And your specialty was law, which I liked. It was the specificity about it too. Like Daniel was in competition really with one other person, and you get emotional about like these people. It's kind of interesting. Like you get attached. This person seems so nice. I want to stay with them. But this time I was like, dude, this is dollars and cents decision. I'm just going to go with whoever's the best, right? Whoever's going to help me the most. And I was like, I like the specialty. This guy seems okay. I'm going to give it, a shot.
Yeah, Matt, I had forgotten that story. Now that you kind of retell it, that the first time we ever spoke, I think it was kind of sort of like a initial kind of conversation. I remember you telling me, now that you're retelling the story, that you were in talks with one or two, other people.
It's always good to talk to some stinkers, because then you makes you more confident in your decision. I talked to a bunch of stinkers, and I was like, oh, so yeah, yeah. So I felt confident enough to take the leap.
Yeah, so in a way, you took maybe a bigger leap than some folks because you weren't coming from like a referral from a personal relationship, a trusted friend or colleague or partner. You were coming from just kind of researching what you saw out there as available. So, in a lot of ways, that's even a bigger leap. So kudos.
So you hired Daniel after interviewing some others. What was the practice like? You had no staff. You pretty much got rid of everybody.
Yeah, my origin, my genesis story. Well, like I said, I fired I left my office. So I trashed all my systems too, right? I was like, I don't need these systems. I literally threw the phone system in the trash. I was like, I can't even sell this, right? So um, Daniel's like, like you do that exercise. Where do you want to be in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And one of them is I want a respectable office that I want to go to every day, right? And so Daniel's like, well, you have to hire someone, right? And so I didn't have a phone system. I did have an office at the time, but I did not consider an office I really liked too much. I liked the people in it. I didn't like the physical plant, which for me is kind of important, like aesthetics. I had one computer, which was mine, right? It was like, and so when I hired my first person, like I couldn't port the phone fast enough, right? So we had no phone, right?
But basically, you were starting over. Like post-COVID,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
basically were starting over. So you come out of COVID, you'd given up everything, all of your systems. You kind of sounds like pretty depressed during COVID, and came out of COVID reinventing who you are and what your practice is about. When was this? What was the date?
I think my first actual time with Daniel, my first coaching session was in January of 2023. It's been now at this recording, where are we at? May 2024.
So roughly 15 months, right?
Right. Yeah, a lot of stuff has changed since then, I have to say. And luckily, the person who had no phone, she was a very tolerant individual. She put up with me and my lack of phoneness. And she's still with me today. She's like my most trusted employee. She's probably going to listen to this. And we sometimes laugh about those days. You're like, hey, now you've got a phone system. I'm now the master tenant in the office. We moved. I have actually had to get my assistant, right? And now I'm hiring an attorney. It's been pretty fast, I have to say. I didn't, that you can make so much progress. I'm not bragging either, right? Like if you told me, oh, in 1 year, you're going to be here and there, I'd be like, okay, okay, PT Barnum, thank you, right? But I can't follow protocol, right? And it happened. Like I can't deny it, right? And now I'm also terrified the whole thing's going to collapse tomorrow. I'm just like some disclaimers. Disaster is always lurking around the corner.
Can I interrupt there, Matt?
Yeah,
So,
sure.
to say you can't follow protocol, then I look at all the progress that you've made over the last 15 months. And I see from a coach's perspective, I see somebody who has basically slam dunked it on implementation, taking all the different things that we've talked about, all the different Atticus, tools and ways of thinking about your practice differently and about your life differently, and then going all in on that. So I look at following protocol in the sense that you've taken these things and you fully implemented on them, or maybe not fully, but to a great degree, to a large degree, to a large enough degree to get from where you were 15 months ago, right, to where you are today, which is pretty impressive.
That's really strange that you say that, because I feel like it's such a struggle to get this stuff going. I don't feel that satisfaction of I totally implemented all this stuff and I slam dunked. If anything, if I was going to give a self-assessment, I'd say like I'm hanging on by like a hair, I'm like on the risk of failing is what I would say, because it's overwhelming. It's like all the stuff that you tell me is overwhelming. Like to implement it all at the same time. It's like an elaborate watch, right? And you're talking to a guy used to working with his hands, right? So it's a big struggle. But that being said, I think if you just get some of this stuff going, you're going to go really far, right? To the average Joe, right? Like I had none of this stuff, and it's all common sense too, like which is why I liked it so much. Like dieting, right? We all know how to lose weight, right? Just stop eating so much, right? It's that easy. It is easy when you think about it conceptually, but obviously it's not that easy, or else we would all be doing it, right? We'd all be slim and trim, and we're not. And the reason why is there's a million things that get in the way. And one thing I have to say is I respond to being part of a team, right? And having to report to Daniel every 2 weeks is probably the best part of this whole thing. Otherwise I'd be eating Twinkies and Ding Dongs all day, right? Instead someone's going to weigh me in, right? And I have to show progress. I feel compelled mentally. You can't be wasting your time. And so of all the things, I've implemented it at a rate of, I'd say, about 45% effectiveness, right? And to top it off, things are always changing, reducing the effectiveness. Or you make a change and you actually reduce the effectiveness yourself, right? Which is something I recently did, right? I tried changing the client intake, only to find out, guess what? You made it worse. But I think that's one thing I think is a huge positive too in this, that I have to do this, right, for my situation, right? So if you're going to sign up, it takes a lot of time, right? Like I spend like an hour a night, like messing around with these ideas. And that's why I think every day you're like, well, what's the big problem of the day, right? Not client wise, like I'm going to lose this case. Like that's a big problem, right? But that's like, well, I've gotten to this stage in my career. It's like, well, you win some, you lose some. You can't change reality. Some cases you're going to lose, but you can fix your lousy client intake system, right? And so I sit around, I think about it, I think about the stuff you've said, and I try to make it a reality, which is something I was hoping to express sooner in the podcast. Why I think it's so effective, the system, is that you help imagine what a successful future should look like, right? I think that's so important. Like if you look at all the old science fiction movies, you'll see all the elements of an iPhone on it, by the way, right? Like Dick Tracy, what was that? Get Smart, the phone in his shoe. It's a stuff like that. Like I remember the map in Dick Tracy. You'd see where he's going. I was like, ooh, now it's like that costs $1,000, right? It's like you can imagine. Well, it's not like imagining the future like I'm going to be driving a Rolls Royce or a Lambo or something like that. It's imagining the future where like you have a decent client intake system, right? Like, and what does that look like, right? Or you're going to hire someone who's not a total flake, right? And what does that look like? Who's actually going to be a good employee? How do you do that, right? And so you help me imagine that. So by imagining it, I could get it into reality, and I actually think it's kind of a weird thing, but I actually think that's super important for problem solving. You have to be able to imagine the future imagine what you're going to do to fix something. And that's really what you do, because all of this stuff is common sense. If you ask me, only the DISC assessment, that was the only thing I thought was not common sense, right? But everything else is kind of, should you write down, what your high value activities and what your low value activities are? And maybe you should think about hiring someone to do your low value activities. What about that, right? That is so obvious, right? Like, of course, like, duh, that's what I said to myself. But I didn't think to do it, right? But you made me do it. I actually wrote down the name of it somewhere. It's like a DISC value assessment plan or something. I don't know. But like all those things, they add up, right? And you just need to make a little progress to get some results. I think that's my experience, because my systems aren't that great. My training is so. I mean, like everything's kind of shabby in my opinion, but it's still creaking along like one of those one-man bands that you see. He's playing the drums and the violin at the same time as he's walking down the street. Sometimes that's how I imagine my law firm, like totally slapped together. But it works, so far the system works. I don't know if that's really a good analogy. Maybe I'll cut that.
But it works. So let me back up. So Daniel, when you have your first call with Matt, he has shared with you, he's pretty much physically thrown his phone system. He doesn't like his office. He's got rid of all the staff. And your first question to him is really, tell me what you imagine your practice and your life to look like. Is that where you started with him?
Yeah, it is. And well, for the record, I don't think Matt told me he had thrown his whole phone system out right before he started the coaching process. So that's interesting to know. Thanks for
It was
sharing.
long before. That's why.
Um, but yeah, I'd have to go back and kind of really think about it. But my guess is that we started with, something like My Great Life, right? Like really helping you, Matt, to get clarity about really what you wanted your future to be like. Like what do you want your future to be? What does that mean to you? Um, and using the My Great Life exercise, which has the lifetime legacy, top 5 lifetime goals, 10-year, 3-year, 1-year, etc. So I probably introduced that tool probably I'm guessing in the first call or two, Matt. Is that your recollection?
I think it was the first thing you asked me to do.
Yeah, probably. So from my perspective, I did that, because it's hard for me to help anybody to get where they're trying to get to if they don't know where they want to go. I can't I can't necessarily create that future for them, and so I needed Matt to help me with that. That's probably still one of not to think about the parts that are the bits that are the hardest, but that for you, Matt, I would say that's probably one of the hardest parts still for you, thinking about what the establishing for yourself, like what you want your future to be. And I don't think you're alone in that. I think a lot of people have a hard time even sitting down and facing like the My Great Life exercise for the first time. The good news is, from my perspective, the more you do that sort of thinking and that sort of kind of thought process, I think maybe easier is not the right word, but for lack of a better word, the easier it gets, or the more natural it becomes. Because like any, goal setting in my mind is a skill. So like developing and honing the skill of imagining what your future is going to be or what you want it to be. So yeah, we started there very, call one, it sounds like, and for good reason.
It's probably the most critical thing from a coaching perspective and a visioning perspective. Where do you want to go? What do you want to be? What do you want to do? And most of the time when we start working with clients, they're coming from the perspective of anywhere but here. Like everything I have going in my practice, I don't really like, and everything what's going on in my life, I don't really like. And I'm just not happy with any of it. And so taking a moment to say, okay, what would make you feel happy? What would make you excited about going into work is a perfect place to start. What's the second thing that you two worked on? Because I know you've grown your staff, you've got a phone system that works, you're very happy with your practice, right? You're marketing like a wild man, you know. So what was the second strategy? What was the second thing that you said, okay, this is the next thing we're going to work on together?
How to hire, I think, because I wanted to hire an assistant, and I had to take a DISC assessment myself. I first was very suspicious, like, oh, come on, right? But actually, I was quite surprised that I was such an open book, right? And not 100% right, but I'd say 90% right. And I ended up, if this person was listening, I hired a very great person who I'm very glad I hired. That was a revelation to me because I've had my last assistant before her did not work out, let's put it that way. And I was just surprised by the enthusiasm and the kind of like team playerness, right? And it really helped build what I think is a good culture for my office. I really want to come to the office, not be with a bunch of people I don't like, right? And I think it's a real positive place. I don't know if everyone likes me, right? But I like them. And I think that hiring was really important. Also was like a leap of faith, at the time. Like I said, I had boxed myself in with so many kind of prohibitive thoughts then after a while you lose confidence, right? And I had lost confidence. And so, well, you're going to hire this person. You're either going to end up on the rocks or not, right? And it didn't. It worked, which was good. It was a nice shot in the arm. And then, keep building. Actually, what I think the most important thing was the time map and the value. I forgot what it was called. The value. You write down the values of your time. What you think. What do you do, and assign it a value. Right. I forgot what it's called. Like
The division of functions worksheet,
yeah, that's it.
identifying where you're spending your time. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the time map or the time template, but because I think we went into that very early on as well, which is not surprising either. Steve, you know this very well, and you know it too, Matt. Like nobody can, you can't do different things in your practice, whether it's thinking about it differently or actually doing something in a different way, if you're already kind of overflowing, right? You don't have the ability or time to do something, do something different, let alone think about things differently. But who has time to do 90 minutes of uninterrupted time thinking about my great life when you have all this casework and all these other things to do? So yeah, it's starting with some practical, time management and focus management strategies to help give you some capacity to basically be able to do this other type of thinking. I think we started there pretty early on.
Hi, it's Steve. Sorry to interrupt this episode, but if you're new to Atticus and you're listening to our podcast and you don't understand how a practice advisor works, in this particular case, you're listening to an interview that features a practice advisor who's really coaching and advising someone how to grow their practice. If you're curious on how to work with a practice advisor, I'm going to put a link in the show notes, and I'm going to give you a complimentary, no-charge practice growth diagnostic. So you can talk to one of our membership directors about how to work with a practice advisor. That if you've never had the opportunity to work one-on-one with one of our top flight practice advisors, I'm going to encourage you, as you listen to this episode, ask yourself, would somebody like this be able to help me and help me grow my practice and help me cultivate a great life? With that, thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode.
Yeah, I think Steve calls it intentionality. Right.
So a little bit of intentionality there, right? A little bit of intentionality there.
I call it responsible use of your time to get stuff done, right? Because let's face it, I've had this experience where I spent the morning trying to fix like Adobe on my computer, right? I'm like, what did you accomplish? Nothing, right? You wasted your morning. Like, you might as well have been washing the windows in the office, right? You would have gotten more out of it, right? So this is more like what's important, and I'll tell you, that was like a revolution in my life. I'm gonna be honest, because I spent many mornings fixing Adobe, fixing my email, licking a stamp, doing this, doing something at the bottom of the functions worksheet, and then wondering why I'm not making any progress, right? And so why? Because you think you're worth $500 an hour, you just spent the morning doing like minimum wage work. That's why, So and you don't think about it that way until it's presented to you, like until you presented it to me, like Daniel, like that. I never really thought about it that way. I thought this is just life. Some people are better at it than me, right? And that's why I'm where I'm at, right? And it's not. It's kind of scientific, actually, right? Like, what's the most valuable? Do that. Get someone else to do the other stuff. It's that easy.
Yeah, it's that easy. But right, the idea being that it's even the things that might seem like common sense are really difficult to take action on if you're kind of swallowed up in all these other things that you're doing. I was thinking, Matt, one thing interesting with you is from my perspective, right, is normally when I start working with somebody, they do have some team members. They do have a phone system, I will say. They have like some sort of structure in place, and usually part of the early on process is dismantling some of that structure, or getting rid of people that aren't A players or not a good fit for the firm. So you had already done all that work, kind of thinking this through, and you were kind of coming to the coaching process like more of a clean slate, so to speak, in some ways, and we're able to build out from that kind of cleaner foundation. So just kind of, from my perspective, interesting.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it. I mean, I had cases, but as far as systems goes, I was bereft. Is what I would call it, right? So yeah, you really helped me get that going.
Well, let me ask you this. Maybe this will help you. So in 15 months, so here we are in May of 2024. What are the three biggest improvements that you've made to the practice?
Responsible use of time. These are all like theoretical, right? Not not like, oh, I write motions to compel better or something like that. This is more like theoretical. One is, I think the number one thing is responsible use of time, right? Or being intentional, as you would say, because then problems get addressed, right? And every business is going to have loads and loads of problems, right? It's just the way it goes. It's not perfect. Daniel really helped me out with that. With the daily planner, you guys give some tools. Actually, I use that all the time. By the way, I spend believe I like torture myself every night. Like, what do I put in this, right? What is the problem of the day, and it's like, in a way, it's become like a meditative process for me in a weird way. I hate to say that. I don't want to sound, it sounds kind of fruity, but like I will sit down around 8:30, 9 o'clock every night, open up that planner till about 10 o'clock, and just be like, well, what's going right? What's going wrong? How can I make things better? And then it like devolves into life too, by the way. Like, you'll think about other issues in your life too. I just can't help it, right? And so that the responsible use of time, that's a big one. The idea of like a positive culture in the firm, and by that I mean not only are people happy and it's a good place to work, but knowing what people are doing, right? That is a huge struggle for me, and I constantly like wrangle with this. Like, what are we doing, right? What is everybody doing? Like, I can't look at everyone 24 hours a day. I ask them to do things. Like, are they doing the right things too? Right? That's another thing I worry about, right? So, so that leads to the rise of systems, I'd say, and the dismantling of systems. The systems get created, they get thrown away, a new one comes. Uh, Everyone gets mad. Then you get another system, right? And so uh, that was very important for me. I would say just the idea of tending to the business, knowing what is going on, almost like a shepherd with his sheep. You want to make sure the wolves aren't feasting, right? And the wolves can be anything, by the way, right? That was a big one. I also think, the idea, believe it or not, like, it also instilled in me like this idea, like, I'm going to succeed. Like, I'm taking a huge risk, I think, hiring this guy. I'm hiring an 8-year attorney at a rate I never imagined I'd ever hire someone at. And believe it or not, like, I was attractive enough to get him away from a very prestigious law firm. I couldn't believe that. I was like, wow, I must have really made some strides here, right? That, like, he wants to work for me. Like,
Matt, can I interrupt you for a
yeah,
second? So I just want to paint a picture. So I know all the backstory there, but just to paint a picture for people listening. 15 months ago, it was just you, no team, and then you hired a full-time, person, staff member, assistant.
yeah.
Then you hired another full-time assistant. Fast forward like, I don't know, 10 months or so, and now 15 months later, you're in the process of hiring, attracting from a big prestigious law firm at a compensation point that you maybe didn't conceive as possible or really doable 15 months ago. Attorney, 8-year attorney, to come join your firm as of this moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. For me, that's like really impressive.
All that's true, by the way, right?
Well, the big question is, are you giving them a phone? That's what
No,
I'm worried about. Is the guy getting a phone? Like, I'm worried about the
Part of
phone.
the benefits
dude,
package.
it's hilarious, but yeah, I got a phone system now, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
we have three. So in 15 months, we've hired three staff, right? Three support team,
two support teams, two
two
support.
support team, and then we've made an offer to a talented 8-year attorney, which is well done, very, very, very well done. That presupposes cash. Has your cash flow improved? Has your profitability improved? Has your gross revenue improved? Has the finances for you to buy these things, buy the capabilities? Have these improved? If so, how and why?
Yes, the cash flow has improved. I would say, depending upon when you talk to me, I would say I'm earning money at a rate of twice or 4 times faster than I used to. Depends on the point in time. Like I could settle a big case. Oh, I'm earning 8 times faster, right? Than a month goes by, right? So, but it's also more predictable. That's really the thing. Like, uh, what was it? The financial planner. I forgot what it was called. I ended up like making all these different things.
The cash flow focuser? You're talking about the cash flow focuser?
No, actually, the financial dashboard,
Yep.
Gotcha, the dashboard.
but it's more focused, in my opinion, that for the hourly type charging attorney. That's not me. I'm a contingency fee attorney. So the money kind of comes and goes based on certain events. It's like conditional money. And so like everything else in Atticus, you should adapt it for your own best use, right? It's not one size fits all. That is definitely the truth, right? Like if you just expect Daniel to come in like an analyst and be like, okay, these are the 10 things you need and it's ready to go. You just have to do what I say. It's not going to work. At least I don't think it's going to work. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, Daniel. Maybe you have different experiences, but I didn't work. I didn't like using it the way, maybe that's a better way of putting it. I thought it could be better used. So I have created my own financial tools and called Excel spreadsheets of one kind or another that help me predict the future. And my future is, hey, guess what? You don't think it's true, but it's true that you could hire someone at this rate, right? So, and if you hire someone at this rate, you can imagine what might happen in a year, right? What will happen in a year if you do that, right? Properly done, I should make more, right? I mean, isn't that the whole point? And so the main thing is like, none of that is really not common sense. I mean, that's what drives me nuts about this whole thing. Like, man, if I had better common sense and a better sense of like responsibility, I could like been this way 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? But that's the way it is.
Well, it's actually it's not common sense. It's more, most of the concepts that you're talking about internally, I call them strategic growth concepts. So they're strategic ideas that allow you to conceptually wrap them around your practice, and then you adopt them to your practice, or you get them about 80 to 90% close so you can make good decisions about your future and your practice. So they're really not common sense. Once you start to use them, they seem like common sense because they're shortcuts. All strategic growth concepts are shortcuts based on things that we've learned for 30 years working with other lawyers. When you start to apply them, you're like, of course, this makes perfect sense. So it's common sense then. But up to that point in time, it's like a foreign language. It doesn't make any sense until you start to apply it. Then once you apply it, you're like, of course I would refer it as that from this point forward. Of course I would do this. Most lawyers would never do what you've done in 15 months. A lot of lawyers would say, nah, I'm good enough. Like, I'm good enough. I've done a good enough job. Or they might listen to all the fears that are running loose in their head and say, no, I'm either too old, or I'm not rich enough, or I'm not good looking enough, or I'm not this, or I'm not that, or I'm in the wrong state, I'm in the wrong practice area, I'm in the wrong whatever. And what you did is you had the courage to work through it, recognize those things as fears, and start to take risks and apply concepts to your practice. And now you're like, hey, this is common sense. At the time, it wasn't. And I could tell you a system or a process now that I see as I listen to you. I'm like, okay, here's what's going to happen next for Matt. Here's probably what's going to happen next. And Dan's probably anticipating a few things. But if we talk about those things now, Matt, they won't look like common sense now. They'll look like, well, that's really a stupid idea.
I mean, you're right. Uh, they are analytical tools that are more developed than common sense, even though it seems like common sense. Some of it's common sense, I suppose, but it's a huge help. Let's put it that way. It helps you overcome your all-purpose excuses.
Yeah,
Why
totally.
you shouldn't do things. And I'm very well practiced at all-purpose excuses, by the way.
Well, and most people listening to this podcast are experts on it. That's one of the reasons that's one of the reasons it works so well. So you've increased cash flow, in your contingency fee. So I totally get it. So you might increase 2 to 4 times. You're thinking that you've increased 2 to 4 times. We've hired 2 staff people. We're hiring an 8th-year attorney to come on staff, and you and Daniel have kind of done the analysis of what that should look like for you financially. What do you see next for your practice based on the progress that you've made for the past 15 months?
I have a lot of ambitions that haven't been accomplished, as, believe it or not in the business realm, but in the law realm of being a trial attorney. And, you can't take on cases of the scale I want to take alone. And so I want to take those cases on and win. And that's part of the plan of increasing cash flow, by the way. You win a big case, you win a big fee. And, I never doubted myself in the law part of the business. I think it's just, I'm kind of a well-placed person for being a lawyer. And I never doubted it. But the business side, I need help. And I got it. I'm really psyched, actually, that I did. It was very good. And so that's the future. I don't want to be one of these full-time managers. I actually like practicing law. There's some parts I don't want to do ever again. Like I like being involved in it. And so if I could hire some kind of business manager and do all that, I'd be pretty psyched. That'd be pretty good, to offload those, kind of the Steve Riley stuff, I call it, right? The financial analysis, the this, the that, the training, the new initiatives. Though I have to say, I think I do enjoy doing it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it, right? Like, it wasn't out of desperation, I think, that I did it. I think actually it was like, I got kind of intrigued, almost like playing with a new machine, and I was really glad I did, because it's helped me out.
So, Daniel, as you look back and you think about the progress you guys have done over the past 15 months, what do you think the 3 biggest strategies are that Matt adopted to grow the practice the way he has? I mean, these are great, really a great outcome, 15 months. And here's the thing, Matt. What you've done well is implement and execute on the ideas. Now, you may not give yourself a high score on it, but there are other lawyers that have implemented very, very poorly, but would give themselves very, very high scores. So
I wish I was one of those guys.
So they might have implemented 4 things and said, I'm 100% amazing, but they left 80 things on the table. You know what I'm saying? So Daniel, from your perspective, you've worked with him for the past 15 months. What if you look back, say, what are the 3 core things that you think he did that other people who are listening to this episode can learn from?
I think the first thing is probably the one that Matt has kind of talked about a good bit already, but really that you've delegated. I mean, Steve, you and I talked about this on a recent podcast, but if you imagine that over 15 months, so 15 months ago, going back to that starting point with Atticus, right, in the coaching process, it was just you. If you wanted to delegate, there was nobody to delegate to. So now fast forward to today, you're on the cusp of having, 2 full-time and 1 full-time attorney to delegate to. So I think you've, mastered is probably not the right word, but you've really gone all in on the idea that if you can push down the things that aren't really your wheelhouse, or somebody can do cheaper, faster, and better, you've done that. And I again, yeah, it might seem like common sense. And even if it is common sense, there's still, with this piece in particular, with, bringing people on board, and it may be an attorney more than anything else. And this was just my anecdotally, what I see with the people I work with. There's a ton of fear around that for a lot of people. Like, building out a team, there's a lot of responsibility on your part that I'm sure you feel that on your shoulders, bringing these people on, paying their compensation, making sure that they're taken care of, making sure that they're contributing to the firm. There's so many different, so to me, there's a lot of emotion there, right? Not just for you, Matt. I mean, for anybody listening, for anybody building a business, a law firm. So I think you, whether you had that fear or not, I don't know. You can speak to that, but
Totally, man. Are you
yeah,
kidding?
of course. So,
Am I impervious to regular emotions? I was totally afraid. That's the whole thing. I'm going to go bankrupt, right? This is too expensive, right? All purpose excuse, right?
and so you did it anyway, right? You looked at the kind of the benefits and what the result might be if you kind of did this thing and it worked out, and you're continuing to do that. It's not like you're done, obviously. You're continuing to do that. You're hiring an attorney, kind of thinking through as you get to, I think what Steve you call the span of management, as you get to that 4 to 6 people in terms of management, maybe one of your future hires probably will be somebody to kind of lead the team, right? Outside of yourself.
I've thought of that.
Yeah, good. So that would be my first one. I think Matt's ability to get past the fear, get past the kind of scariness of building out a team, and he's done that like incredibly fast. I mean, frankly, you've done it very quickly, and you've done it very successfully. Like your first hire, everybody you've hired is still with you. Like those 2 people, those were initial hires, and they're still there, which is a pretty big deal. And even if you do all, and we think we all know this, but even if you do every single thing that you should do, like all the best practices, use the disc, create a really good, robust, clear job description, have a successful, I know you did this really well, Matt. You had a successful kind of ramp to success to get that person onboarded in the first 90 days. Even if you do all those things, there's a percentage chance that it's not going to work out, right? That it's not going to be there. So you were fortunate in that regard, but you laid all the groundwork to make it give yourself the best chance of success. So one, delegation. I would say two, that we mentioned that tool, but the idea of having, and I think I talked about this on a podcast a couple times ago, but the financial dashboard for me, and it's always like that piece that is so hard to get attorney owners to implement on because lots of reasons, but I think there's this kind of aversion to thinking about the money related to the practice, and maybe just aversion to facing reality from a financial perspective. But Matt had no version of that, or even if he did, he overcame it. And you implemented the financial dashboard. You took it, you made it your own. You've made it better than it even was in its original form, and you continue to utilize it on a monthly basis. So I think that's allowed you, from my perspective, to make it easier to make these strategic growth decisions because you have a clear picture from a financial perspective of where things are. So it's a lot easier to hire an 8-year associate at a healthy compensation level when you know where you stand financially and what you can forecast with some level of predictability, where you're going to be. And that goes to another piece, which we haven't talked about at all, but you also did really well, which was the marketing, piece of things. The third piece I would say, and you mentioned this with talking about positive culture, is you have adopted this habit of focusing on the wins, like focusing on the things that are going well, focusing on successes, gains, wins, where things are working out, as opposed to being focused on the things that aren't working out. Do you do that perfectly? No. Does anybody? Probably not. But you have adopted, in my mind, this kind of adopted into the idea that focusing on the wins is a really healthy habit, and it actually produces more growth in the future than if you don't do that, if you don't focus on the wins. And you've done this in different ways. Partly, you've taken a tool that I use with all my coaching, clients, which is the coaching clarity exercise, which Steve invented, right? Or created. And so you've taken that tool and you've modified it. You've even made that different and better, right? And the first part of it is all about wins and successes. I don't know if you remind me if you're still doing this, but you rolled that same idea out to your team, to where even like in team meetings where you're having everybody kind of focus on a win for the day or for the week, that sort of thing. So that would be my third one. From my perspective, you've adopted the habit of focusing on wins and successes really well. And I think if anybody has, heard me or Steve talk about this in the past and has been doubtful that that's really a strategic growth, strategy, I think you're proof that it really is. But I think that's an important piece of what's helped you get to where you are, quickly in the last 15 months. That's my take.
I think it's actually a brilliant retention strategy. So if because we were all talking about this before the show started, how negative and how tough the legal business can be. And if you're a legal assistant or an associate or a paralegal, receptionist, it doesn't matter, team leader, and everything's equal as far as dollars go. Assume everything's equal as far as dollars. Where would you want to work? Somewhere where the work that you do is appreciated, that there's an attitude of gratitude around you. People are happy to see you when you come to work. The attorney who owns the firm is happy to be there. Or do you want to go into the firm? And I think all of us have been there as attorneys where the partners are screaming at each other. The talented lawyers have left because they can't put up with it. The talented staff have left. Just the mediocre staff who have thick skin stay. And those firms start to rot from the inside out. And so if you've got a talented person who's got a choice to be where they're appreciated or where they're potentially criticized constantly, I think it's a brilliant long-term strategy. I think it's a great strategy. I think while it sounds so simple and so elegant, and as you might say, Matt, common sense, I can't see that the common sense is applied on a consistent basis in the legal industry. I don't think it is. I don't see it. I don't feel it, and that's how come I think this is such a great, you coming on here and sharing your thinking and thoughts is so great, because you're trying to encourage other lawyers to have a great practice, have a great life, and approach it differently. So anything you want to say about that before I ask you another question?
It's a retention strategy, believe it or not. I'm retaining myself, right?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm retaining myself.
You had I heard on a podcast of yours, someone say, listen, I want people to work here for the rest of their lives, right? Because believe it or not, it's profitable, but it's also nice. And I'm kind of the same way. I actually tell people that you're supposed to work here for at least 10, 20 years, right? That's my expectation, right? And I tell my assistant she's not allowed to quit. That's another thing. And, I focus on, because I can't compete with the big boys dollar for dollar. It's a lot of it's non-cash considerations. Like, you have, if someone's out sick, I just say this, I'll just suck it up. Don't worry about it. You're a good employee. I'll just get your regular salary. You don't have to worry about sick days and all this, administrative stuff, which can become a problem. And just like work-life balance is a big emphasis, here in the firm. And I think, people really like that, by the way. I like it, but like someone's telling you, hey, I want to improve you, right? I want to send you to lessons somewhere so you can get better. They really react positively. And I think just people like to be cared about, so I think the last thing I want to talk about is for the business owners, you have to have empathy for yourself, right? Like you're going to fail, right? And sometimes you're going to fail big time. Like I haven't gone over nearly all the failures I've had in my life, right? Which are numerous, right? And I'm like a pockmarked battlefield with failures, right? And so it leads me to this point, is that someone's always going to be more successful than you are, right? Like you have your aspirational people, but then like you have your classmate in law school who's like totally like been way more successful, right? And I have all these guys that come up to me and they say, I'm talking about retirement, right? I'm like, so I think it's really important to like just be okay with where you're at. And it took me a long, long time. And it took me to get gray hair before that was all right. Maybe I had to change. Because then you're like doing the right thing as opposed to trying to catch up to everyone else, right? When you're not supposed to be trying to they haven't walked in your shoes. They haven't had your obstacles, right? Maybe if they had your obstacles, they would be like nowhere, right? So you just can't worry about that stuff and just be like, all right, it's great that they're hitting it or they're doing a great job, but you can do a great job too. And I think for me, that was so important. I know it sounds so ridiculous and so new agey to say that, but like, I had a hard time during COVID, after COVID, to like really think if I was going to turn it around. I guess I was kind of bummed out. And, uh, I think mindset is so important. Like if you just have the will to overcome, you will do it, right? Like I say to myself, this thing is going to make money. I don't care what I do wrong, how many cases I lose, right? How many opportunities I squander. This is going to work, right? Because I'm going to make it work. If you have that attitude, it works. At least for me, it's worked, right? We're just that determination, like I'm going to make it work, right? It might not work 100%, but it'll be good enough, right? So I don't want to be, I don't know if that's too crazy or not, but I think that's so important that like how people feel, because like you could go to the summit and I could tell when people didn't trust the process, right? And they didn't think it was going to work. I could just look at them, right? And tell like the questions they had, the things they did, the problems. I was like, dude, like your coach should have probably talked to you about that like 10 times, but you're not doing it. Why aren't you doing it? Right. And it's all these emotional problems. And one of my favorite podcasts of yours, Steve, is you talk about a guy who went to one of your seminars and he like went to Harvard or Yale. And then you had a bunch of guys who went to these like local regional schools that were like zero, prestige. And they listened to what you said and they implemented it and they got results. This guy was thinking about it. And I know exactly what he's thinking because I've engaged in this thought process too. And that is, you think you deserve success because of what you've done in the past, right? Like, oh, I went to school. I graduated at this rate. I'm of a talent. I'm a super genius. I'm handsome to boot, which is not true anymore, unfortunately. And, so I should succeed. I shouldn't have to go on 3 lunches a week. I hate that, right? No, dude, you got to do the stuff. It's just the way it goes. And the guy like wasn't able to let go of these obstacles. This idea of what he'd done in the past would get him through the future. And I think it was a sense of what you were describing is this kind of realization that you're just kind of like a regular guy. You're not hot stuff. I've had clients like this too, where they feel like, I went to these great schools and a lot of my compadres, like we're able to ride the wave of prestige, right? But hey man, if you start doing contingency fee work, riding the wave of prestige is like tough, right? You're not really going to be able to do it. And I think there's like a sense of disappointment that this guy was struggling with.
He was confused. So he was disappointed, confused, and at the core of it, he believed he was entitled to something because he understood intellectually the same things that everybody else understood. What he couldn't do was the work to get the work. And that's what you're doing. You're doing the work to get the work. You're doing the work to get the practice. You're doing the work to get the life that you want. And the price that you pay is time. The price that you pay is money. You invest into these things. The price that you pay is pain. You learn. You go, oh, well, God, that sucked. That hurt. I don't want to do that again. Maybe if I do it differently this time, it'll work better this way. Maybe I'll learn from this way. And what he wanted to do was think about it. And he went to think about it. And in his mind, he'd already paid the price. He'd done the work to get where he was at. He went to the right school. He'd heard me talk a bunch of times. He was like, I've listened to you talk, but nothing's really changed. And my wife will say this funny thing. She's got this great quote. And she'll say, nothing changes until something changes. And what she really means is nothing changes in your life until something that you're doing changes. You have to make a change. And expecting the world to accommodate to your expectations is at the core of entitlement. You're entitled to this outcome. And that freezes, in my opinion, that freezes people in that place in their life for the rest of their life. This is where you meet somebody. You might meet somebody like 10 years ago, and this guy if I talk to him now, it's probably 15 years now. He's probably the same revenue, same income, same frustration, same weight, same look, probably not the same relationships, probably not the same marriage. But he's the same guy that he was 15 years ago. You're not the same guy you were 15 months ago, which makes you far more interesting to talk to. It makes you far more of a contributor to the Atticus community. It makes you far more interesting to Daniel to coach. And you're willing to do the work. And you're not the type of guy that's coming into anything saying, I'm entitled to this because of I'm entitled to it. And that's the core of it. As I listen to you, Matt, that's the core of it. You're willing to do the work. That's what you've done for 15 months. That's why you've been successful. I mean, Daniel, you agree?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's why I wanted you on the podcast, because you are like the the prototype, or that's not the right word, like the perfect example of somebody who takes what, like you even said at the beginning of this podcast, like you could go and get information from the internet, you could read books, you can source the knowledge. I mean, it's 2024, right? You can source a ton of knowledge from almost anywhere on the planet at your fingertips. But what you've done so well is you've taken the knowledge and you've applied it to your practice, and you've applied it to your life, and you've seen the results. So I think that for me, that's exactly what's happened. So yeah, I totally agree. And you may think it's common, but it's not. Not everybody does that, Matt. As
It
well as
only
you.
looks, yeah, sorry, Daniel, it only looks like common sense after you've done the work. Until then, it looks like fear. It looks like a problem. It looks like a confusion. It looks like confrontation. It looks like a mess. And then after you do the work and you apply it, well, that wasn't so hard. That was actually pretty simple. Now that I look at it, that's kind of common sense. Now that I understand how to solve that particular problem, it becomes common sense. Until it was a problem, And that's the thing I keep having to remind myself. If I knew the answer to this problem, I would have solved it already. This is where a lot of people stop, is that they don't want to pay for the answer to the problem. They don't want to do the work. They don't want to pay for the pain of learning to solve the problem. And that's what you've done very well. While you're not giving yourself a great score, which really doesn't matter, it's your score about what you've done from an effectiveness perspective. To Daniel and I, you've hit a home run. Really well done. You've done a great job. You've executed well. You've grown. You got a phone system, which is a huge progress, right? But you've done excellent. You've done excellent work, and you've done ugly work that people don't want. Look, I'll be the first to concede, and I've said it many times on our little episodes here, is that marketing's hard work, and it took me probably 2 years of doing exactly what you're doing, which is putting on my coat, my tie, going out, meeting other professionals, learning about other professionals, and probably took me 2 years to realize none of my competitors were doing that work. And once I realized none of my competitors were doing that work, I moved my number from 3 contacts per week to trying to get to 10 to 15. And so I was like, how can I get 12 to 15? How can I get more contacts per week? And then I start looking for ways of leverage. Then I'm looking for ways of improving. Then I look for ways of ramping up on the staff side and ramping up on the support side. And I start, how do I improve my top of mind awareness? Because I realized most of the lawyers that were really far smarter than I was, better degrees, better certifications, and people that I really looked up to academically were sitting in their office terrified to go out and develop a relationship that either they thought was below them or they didn't know how to do it. And that's why ultimately, you're going to be incredibly successful because you're willing to pay for the pain, or willing to do the pain, to do something that you will then, in retrospect, say was common sense. So good for you, Matt. Really well done. Really well done. Good job. Just straight up a good job, man.
Gotta like get ready for some rejection. That's what it is.
Well, it's also learning. It took me, I had one guy, and this is a true story. So I had one guy that was a terrific should be a terrific referral source. And I met him and I contacted him, probably had 2 lunches with him. I probably contacted him once a month because he could really send a lot of business. And At the end of the day, it took 2 years before he sent me a case. And that case that he sent me has developed not only to a great case, but a great business into one of my best friends. And I asked him, why did it take 2 years? He goes, I want to see if you stick around. I want to see if you're persistent. I want to see what you do. So with that, I know we got to wrap up. Daniel, I know you got a hard stop. Anything you want to say, Daniel, before we wrap up?
Just looking forward to the next 15 months. See where things take you, Matt. And really, great job. Great job. You've done really good work. And you came in, I mean, you came in honestly, like very, very, like a lot of people do, but very skeptical, right? But you still came in, you still did it, you still signed up, and the results speak for themselves. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens over the next 15 months. It's going to be great.
Good work. Matthew, anything you want to say before we wrap up?
I just wanted to say thank you for having me on. I am a big proponent of Atticus. It's a very positive place, and I think it helped me out a lot. It really did. So thanks.
No, thanks for your vulnerability. Thanks for your authenticity. Thanks for being who you are and just telling it as it is, man. I really, really appreciate it. And as we pull this podcast to close, if you guys have an employment lawyer that you need in California, you know who to call. Matt. With that, everybody, thank you.
All right. Adios.
Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.